G'day everyone. For those I've not met, my name's Viran. I'm a sports physician up in the Northern Territory. I'm a member of our college's Indigenous Health Advisory Committee, and today it's my privilege to have a chat with Sera Naiqama regarding how she manages her indigeneity within the Australasian sporting landscape. Sera is very well accomplished. She's an Australian-born Fijian. She's an active member, playing member with Sydney Uni Football, the New South Wales Waratahs, the Australian Wallaroos, and they're obviously getting ready for their World Cup next year. She's a marketing and communications coordinator, and she's got far more media experience than I do, being a sports commentator with the ABC, and more recently, I believe, a Stan Sport rugby panellist. So welcome, Sera, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Viran. That was quite the introduction. Thank you. I really appreciate all of that. Made me sound a lot better than what I am.
Very well deserved from what I've read.
Thank you.
Sera, we'll get to the hard-hitting questions later. As we sort of discussed, we are the College of Sports Physicians, so we like sport just as much as the next person, a bit of banter around sport. So I guess we'll just start off. What did you make of the Wallabies loss to England on the weekend?
Oh, that was really tough, wasn't it? That was a really tough loss because, you know, the boys they had such a successful streak throughout the rugby championships. They headed onto the spring tour. Everyone, you know, at Stan and just the wider rugby community really believed that the Wallabies had it in them. They had their first test match against Scotland, which we saw them go down, and that was only by 2 points. That was heartbreaking, and, you know, a call that didn't work in their favor, and particularly that yellow card coming to. So you think, you know, they're still very much in the fight. Like, it just got away from them. Then last week they had England, and in my personal opinion, I thought that the Wallabies were going to perform extremely well, just because they had the fire in the belly from the previous week. And also they had played 12 test matches between July and November, compared to England, who have played only 8, 6 of which took place at the Six Nations at the front of the year, which they didn't do very well at. So it was a little bit disappointing, but realistically, what it came down to was the last 25 minutes of that match. I thought the Wallabies were very much in the fight, but few costly ball handling errors. Yeah. They had a lot of disruption in their starting 15, remembering that a lot of their starting front rowers were off.
Yeah, well, they've gone back to, I think, their starting hooker.
Yes. Last week they had Folau Fanga back in the fold, but they put him on the bench this week heading in to their match against Wales. So there were a few things that looked a bit different for the Wallabies side, but, you know, this week they've got their last test match against Wales on Sunday, 4 a.m. Join me on Stan, everybody. It's a grueling hour to commentate football. But I'm really looking forward to seeing what the Wallabies do, because they've just restored so much faith in rugby here in Australia, I believe, throughout this 2021 test season.
What do you think they need to do to beat Wales? We've got a few Welsh fellows, so...
I feel like that's such a hard-hitting question. Look, to be honest, I think that they have the front row for them will be huge. Last week they didn't necessarily, it's not that they weren't inexperienced, but they didn't just have as much experience as their starting pack. So I think what will be the difference this week needs to be set piece. Like, if they can dominate that, which we know that they can, I think that will give them the go forward they need, and also set their backs up to express themselves and come away with the W. So I'm really looking forward to it, to see some names return to the fold, like Tolulatu. He'll make his starting return as hook for the Wallabies, and he's got lots of experience. So I'm a second rower, so I froth over line out. So let's go, boys. Show us what you can do.
Very good. Obviously wasn't a very particularly good weekend for Southern Hemisphere teams. I think even the All Blacks lost to Ireland again. There's no particular question to that. We just got a fair few New Zealand fellows as well. So I'm just bringing that point up. But I think
salt in the wound.
Yeah, well, you know, we had a bit, so we've got to even out the ledger. So
love it.
Do you follow still? You know, I think the Fijians are over there as well. They're playing Georgia this weekend, I believe.
Yes, you are right.
Do you still follow Fijian football? And, you know, do you find it difficult to cheer one way or the other, or, you know, rugby's rugby, just crack on and support the best team?
Well, to answer the first part of the question, yeah, I definitely do follow the Fijian rugby. It's really cool because I think when I'm not playing, or if I'm not commentating, I'm a little bit disengaged from the sport, just because, like, rugby is quite hectic and demands a lot in the day-to-day. But it's really cool that through my work with ABC Sport and the radio podcast that I do with Dean Hallertau called Can You Be More Pacific, every week we are talking about what what sports are happening in the Pacific, what teams, what nations are competing. So that keeps me really in touch with what's happening, particularly with my homeland, Fiji. They do have their match against Georgia coming up this weekend. I'm very much looking forward to it. In terms of who I go for, I'm an Australian-born Fijian. So anytime that the Fijians and the Aussies are competing, I'm like, I've got two teams battling out on the world stage, win or lose. As long as they're in the arena, I'm stoked.
No, very good. Well, I'm a Sri Lankan-born Aussie, so I can very much.
You can claim both.
Pardon?
You can claim both.
Absolutely. Ultimately, I just want Sri Lanka to put up a good effort, and that's the biggest challenge.
Love it. Love it.
So just going sort of into some more personal aspects, I understand your parents migrated from Fiji to Australia when they were quite young. Do you know what it was like for them growing up in Australia in the 80s and 90s?
Yeah, I've had like various discussions with my parents of what it was like when they first came to Australia, and what they both will say very early in their pieces is it was quite tough. They came over here. So Dad arrived before my mum did. Dad, he's the only child, which is fair to say a bit of a rarity in Fijian families because we're typically bigger families that have siblings. So he was a little bit of a troublesome teen. So my grandparents were like, you need to get out of Fiji. And particularly at that time, they didn't see that he would make the most of his life in Fiji. So following opportunity, they thought the best thing for him to do was to come to Australia to find work and to start his life fresh. And so shortly after that, my mum came over. She was in Fiji, then she moved to New Zealand to finish, to do high school, and then came through to Sydney. She was quite young, like she was 16, Dad was 18. The story goes they met in a pub, and life and love started quite young for them. But they said those initial stages were quite tough. My mom lost her parents while she was very young. And that first little part that she was here, they were just, trying to navigate life without parents, without, a lot of resources. But they started off well, and they made a family for us. And life definitely came with these challenges, even when we arrived as well, I guess you could safely say. But I guess because of them, we're here, and I have all these fantastic opportunities to represent Australia and talk about my life as an Australian-born Fijian.
I think it's a real common theme with migrants. My parents came over when I was really young, and it's probably taken to me to get to my middle age of life to sort of really appreciate what they've done, moving countries. So it's a theme that I think a lot of people can resonate, and it's like you say, it's part of our identity, whether we accept it or not. What was it like for you though, growing up? Obviously Fijian, brown skin in Sydney. Yeah. What was it like, at school and those sorts of things?
To be fair, growing up, it was a little bit tough, and I say that just because I knew that I was born in Australia, so I was like, I'm Australian, and by nationality, I absolutely am. But I also struggled with my Fijian identity because I hadn't gone back to Fiji, and I had this brown skin, and I didn't go back to Fiji until I was 14 years old. I didn't speak the language, so a lot of my growing up felt a little bit fraudulent to say that I was Fijian because I couldn't. The culture didn't resonate with me, and although it was heavily enforced in our home, particularly because I spent a lot of time with my grandparents growing up, my bumba and my papa, they, English was their second language. So there were parts of our culture that were incorporated into our upbringing. However, it wasn't fully expressed. So because I couldn't speak the language, I was like, well, am I Aussie or am I Fijian? And my surname, for instance, is Naiqama, and I was like, no, it's Naiqama. And then my family being like, no, Q is pronounced as G, in Fijian alphabet. Yeah. And so there's all these little components that were a little bit confusing for me. And realistically, it wasn't until I'd gone to Fiji when that was about 2009, to be able to go and experience my homeland. And then, through family trips of being able to go back into it, I realized that that's actually where I'm from. The blood that runs through my veins is because of this land. And I guess as my understanding and my acceptance of my Fijian heritage became more personal, the more pride I naturally felt that, yes, I am born here in Australia, and it's such a fantastic country, and I'm so blessed. I love the fact that, I identify with being Australian, but I am also Fijian, first and foremost. And that is the part that just makes me feel so much pride. And I struggled with my identity growing up because I didn't feel like people took Pacific Islanders seriously, that they boxed us for just being people who, to be fair, like this is how I felt people perceive Pacific Islanders, that we were not intelligent people, that we were low income earning families. We struggled, we couldn't afford to go to the private schools, and we just weren't afforded the same kind of luxuries that other people in our friend circles had, like that they had. And so that I struggled with that, because I thought, well, when people see me, is that what they see if I say I'm a Fijian? Like, do they see someone who's not eloquent or not very successful compared to her white friends, and that was just what I struggled with. But as I said, going back home and really accepting who I am, understanding the home that I come from, it made me feel a lot more pride to be a Fijian woman.
Yeah. So that's actually really, I just want to touch back on something you said earlier. Do you think that's something a lot of migrant kids find growing up, that they are put in boxes?
Yeah, I absolutely think that. And the most striking example of that would be my bumbo. So she came here, and as I said, alluded to earlier, she like English is her second language. And back in Fiji, she was a cleaner in hotels. So when she came here to Australia, and life was like, more so for them than my parents, life was really tough for my grandparents coming here to Australia. She did nanny jobs and cleaning jobs. And I think because of that, even though you're here in Australia and there is so much opportunity to do more than that, not that there's anything wrong, but if she wanted to do something, but she just felt like that was all that was readily available to her, because that was all she had growing up, or all she knew. And so I think, often the narrative is, when you come from somewhere where you aren't given a lot of opportunity and you're thrust into a land full of opportunity, you don't know how to decipher which is right for you and which isn't. And so sometimes, while people may perceive us as, oh, well, that, we kind of box them, in the same breath, we can also box ourselves by not putting ourselves or pursuing, the plethora of opportunities that are out there in the world for us today.
Yep. That's really great to hear. So what helps you sustain that proudness, I suppose? I know it's not a word, but, obviously you've got
I feel you.
that infectiousness of being Fijian. What helps you maintain that? Is it, what aspects of Fijian culture? Is it, the music, the dance, what makes it run through your veins, like you say?
That's such a beautiful question. Growing up, I thought that Fijian people weren't inspirational people. It's just not what I associated. It's not what I saw when I watched TV or opened up magazines. I didn't see us, therefore I didn't put us there. But as I've evolved and my understanding and my view of the world has evolved, as I've grown as a woman, I've just come to realize that there is so much talent within our community, and it's worth celebrating. And it may not be on the front cover of magazines or making headlines on the news, but because I feel like I've immersed myself more into my culture, and it's enabled me to see things when it happens. And so, yeah, I feel like it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but basically the more that I understand about myself, and the more that I understand about my culture, has enabled me to feel even more pride than what I do. And I look at my family, and I look at my brothers, and I look at my cousins who, are marketing managers, or, are heads of various industries. And I think, well, heck, like that's not just anyone, like that's my people, that's my community. And, we're talking about pardon?
And therefore, why can't I?
Exactly. And, you look at the Wallabies, like how many of those, so your starting 15 are of Pacifica heritage, like that fills me with pride. Like, my people are out here and we're actively doing work, and not just work that make days go by, but important and important work. And so I think being able to recognize the strength of my people has really been the turning point in being a lot more proud about my culture. So
what is your sporting journey? Growing up, I think in New South Wales, were you ever drawn to AFL cricket, our sort of national identities, or was it all going to be rugby for you?
Viran, I love that you think I could have played cricket. I mean, I was a little bit hopeless. I genuinely, like, this is not even like a sob story or anything. Like, I just was not great at sport growing up. I didn't have a sport that made me tick. You know, like some people, they start out with swimming and they're just like strong swimmers. And some people, you know, some say they were born with a football in their hands. Like sport just didn't come naturally to me. I loved to play, like, and I would, you know, involve myself in anything. But basically it was in 2011, it was announced that women's rugby sevens would be included at the Olympics for the very first time, which we also in 2016, when we saw the Australian girls absolutely dominate and come away with the gold. So Australia went mad. So that was like what, 2011, Australia went mad. They're trying to recruit talent, build their team. And so I got plugged in at school. At the time I was attending Endeavour Sports High School, started playing rugby there, naturally got picked up, not naturally, through work, not naturally, as if I'm like the most stunning thing on the field. But then I got picked up. I got picked up for the New South Wales Schoolgirls. So I played Schoolgirls for 2011, 2012. Fell out of the age category, and I was told by my coach, you need to, if you want to continue playing football, you should go find a 15s club. That was the most daunting thing, because you come from playing, you know, sevens, which is essentially 14 people on the field, to 30 people on the field. And so I took his advice on, and I went and found myself at Sydney University. I was 17 years old at the time, and I got plugged in. And basically I haven't looked back since. So, you know, in short, started playing sevens, got plugged into 15s 2 years later at Clubland. And I truly believe, because of my inclusion at Sydney University and all the things that they've given me and how they've shaped me, have put me in good stead for selection for the Waratahs and for the Australian Wallaroo. So it's been an 8-year journey with lots of sweat, lots of tears and some broken bones. But
going though, so that's good.
Here we are.
So if we start to combine a few of those things, sort of sport and culture together, how do you feel you maintain that cultural identity, which is obviously very important to you, particularly in big sporting organisations or big, you know, team environments? As you say, you're 15 on a field for yourselves, but obviously your sport's a bit bigger. So how do you maintain that cultural identity in that environment?
I think in any opportunity that I'm given, I'm always telling people that I am an Australian born Fijian. Like, I reinforce my culture. Like, yes, I probably, you know, not necessarily look different, but the color of my skin says, okay, she's different to everyone else on her side. And I love the fact that throughout the Wallaroos as well, like there are so many girls of different nationalities. And so I think the first one is like, I always make it known in any opportunity that I'm given to have my voice heard. I'm always reinforcing that idea. But more so than that, it's a credit to the organizations that I'm part of. So from Sydney University right through to the Wallaroos, we celebrate each other's cultures, and sometimes it comes in the form of, you know, come dressed in your cultural attire, and sing a song, share a part of your culture. So when you're part of an organization that already celebrate or understand the importance of celebrating culture, it becomes a little bit more easier to just be yourself and be yourself in its entirety.
So you think part of that assistance for an athlete is actually the organisation
Hugely.
Yep.
Hugely. Like, if you set a policy of like, you are welcome here, and not just letting it be lip service, but letting people openly practice their culture, that helps players accept themselves first and foremost, but then it also allows everyone else around them to embrace them. And it also gives everyone a little bit more understanding about what makes their friends tick. Like, cultural differences, you know, sometimes you don't get it. Like, what may come naturally to me, like, oh, like, why do you do that? Or, you know, why, like, what, this is not a real example. Like, why do you share everything? But when you come from a household where you don't have much, you always share. And so I think when you're given that opportunity to be like, oh, if, you know, you have something, you share it, like, people are like, oh, that's why you act like that, or that's why you're like that. So those differences don't become differences anymore. There's an understanding as to why you are the way you are.
Oh, that's really powerful. So on perhaps more of a serious note, have you ever noticed or witnessed behaviour, expectations from people in the more dominant culture, and they don't particularly realise that that's what they're doing? And so people of the less dominant cultures just sort of have to be a bit more subservient and just sort of take that, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think a big one, and relating it directly to sport, like, truth is, I grew up and I didn't have private health insurance. And so in contact sport, your risk of injury is so much higher than your average Joe who doesn't engage in contact sports. Correct me if I'm wrong, doctor. Right? And so you come into semi-professional, professional sport, and you're told, go get private health insurance. In all honesty, I've been playing football for 8 years and I only got health insurance 2 years ago. And the reason for that was because I didn't grow up with health insurance. So my appreciation for it was like non-existent because I had lived my life without it. And the truth of the matter is my parents couldn't afford health insurance. Like there's 4 kids in our family. My 2 brothers played football. They sure as hell didn't play health insurance. And I'm only sure it's because they had their professional contracts that they were covered. But I've heard countless conversations of people being like, well, why don't you have health insurance? It's stupid. Like if you can't afford health insurance, you shouldn't play sport. And I think it's such a misunderstanding sometimes from people, like from medical practitioners to their athletes, particularly those of Pacific Islander heritage, that we don't grow up with health insurance. So you telling us to spend an extra $200 up to $200 a month doesn't make sense to us because we've never had to do it. And then, it's such a small thing, but it's such a common thing because, and even for female athletes, because our sport isn't professional, do we have an extra $200 to play for health insurance?
Yeah.
So it's this really tough thing where people in more dominant cultures who have had the privilege to have health insurance, it's so easy for them to turn around and say, well, you should have health insurance. Well, look, you're flawed with this big bill. That's why you see a lot of athletes, particularly those in non-professional setups, end up going on a waiting list and missing a lot more time off the field than they need to. And it purely comes down to the fact that we didn't grow up with it. We don't have an appreciation for it. And perhaps we're now in a position where we actually can't afford to pay for it.
I think resonates with pretty much every sports position in Australia and New Zealand. Obviously, how things work with healthcare over there is slightly different, and from my understanding, potentially better. But 100%, that is such a challenge. I work with Indigenous athletes with football up here, and we are unfortunately in the situation of requiring sports to cover. And I'm not sure what the solution is. I don't know if you've got any ideas, but you're right. It is very much a disparity that affects people's ability to continue sport, or they just wait 6-9 months for their simpler
waiting list. Exactly.
That someone else would get done in 2 weeks. So thanks for highlighting that issue. Like it's good to hear athletes talk about that because as medical practitioners we know that and we see that, but it's really hard to do anything. So hopefully this gives us a bit more impetus to take it forward and do things about it. Do you think there's any cultural pressure for yourself or any other athletes, Indigenous, Pacifica, Maori, in terms of being forced to play through injury? Is that something you've ever experienced or noticed?
I don't necessarily think that organizations are pressuring people to, particularly any one of those cultures, to play through injury. But I do think that the players do force themselves to play through injury. And, it comes down to a number of things. You love the game, so you don't want to miss out. But then too, sometimes it could, and like I hate to drum up the same thing that I just said before, but sometimes like you can't afford to get the treatment that you want to get. And so you're kind of like, well, then I'll just play through it, or I'll look at different prehab exercises to either prevent how severe this is or to prevent this occurring again. So I don't necessarily think there's pressure from, and this is speaking from experience, like there isn't pressure from the top in my interactions with someone that we both know and, respect is Dr. Cathray. When I did my ACL injury 2 years ago, it was the second time I had done it. The first time I'd done it, I was able to go through without having to have surgery. So I milked an extra 2 years of footy out of it. But then come the second time, she was like, Sarah, you need to go get surgery. And at that time I didn't have health insurance and, I wasn't earning a great deal of money either. So I kind of was like, oh, okay, like, what do we do? So got sent off to a couple of specialists and I'm looking at this bill or this quote from the surgeon and I'm like, I don't have this money. Like, I don't have this money and I certainly don't feel comfortable asking my parents for this money either. So, I really battled with myself to like, well, then do I just stop playing or, do I just keep training and hope it gets better, you know. And it was really because of that a sobering conversation with Dr. Catherine, like, if you want to play football again, you need to get your knee fixed now. And I was able to rack the cash up in time to have my surgery, but in other circumstances, I knew that I would have to probably go on a waiting list and be on there for anywhere between 6 to 12 months if you're lucky. If you're lucky. And, you know, if I didn't take on her advice at the time, like, I strongly believe around that, I wouldn't have played the football that I've been able to play over the past couple of years, because I would have just elongated my off the field time or my recovery time. So yeah, look, I digress. I'm so sorry. I get so stuck into it.
No, I mean, a lot of people are lost to sport for this reason. Like, a lot of, you know, very good athletes from different cultural backgrounds, where, as you say, finance is one unfortunate big aspect of it, that they just, like you say, well, may as well go get a trade or something like that instead of pursuing their sport, which obviously professionally is great, but even from a health perspective is very important. So
quality of life, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think also, just to touch back, I think you've made a lot of sports physicians happy when you said you conservatively managed your ACL injury the first time as well. So that's an ongoing debate in the sports medicine world. So you've made a lot of people happy with that.
Great. Pleased to know.
Last year, I don't know if you were aware, in the AFL and the NRL, a lot of the Indigenous athletes, in order to continue playing in Queensland, in the hub, were asked to get vaccinations. And that was an unfortunate error from multiple aspects. Do you think, as touching on that specific, but also generally, what can, you know, doctors, sports physicians, what can we do to make sports safer for Indigenous athletes, Pacific athletes like yourself?
That's such a big question, but like, I love that we're talking about it. I really do. You know, there's something to be said about, like, not having enough information before you're making an informed choice about, you know, what you're putting into your body. And like, I see it within my own family. Like, my grandma is quite hesitant towards the medical system because she doesn't trust it. And there's a range of reasons, particularly for Pacific Islander families, as to why we don't engage with the medical system. One is because we don't necessarily believe that there's a lot of information, so we don't feel safe. Two, the people that are communicating the message may be someone that may look like someone, or may be someone that there isn't trust. There's no trust. It's like, okay, so there might be a white doctor saying you should get this, and you're kind of like, well, why should I trust you? I don't know you. You don't know me. You haven't built a relationship, and you're just telling me to get it because it's good for me. But delve deeper as to why, because when people don't understand the why, they disengage a lot earlier than what they probably need to. And so I think there's this general mistrust, and I certainly, with that example that you use of the players being asked to vaccinate, I think it's really hard to do something when you're told to do it, as opposed to you understanding, you know, the risk and the benefit of getting it, and then making an informed choice. That was really harsh for those players in the hub. You know, they're obviously in a hub because they're there to play a sport, but they're also being told, yeah, you're here to play a sport, but if you want to play, you're going to have to get vaccinated as well. And that's really tough. And while a lot of us,
particularly when it's like you, because of your cultural background, but not some
exactly
cultural background.
Exactly. So I think it's like there's a whole bunch of reasons. And like, I personally, like, I struggled to understand if with the most recent vaccine, if it was something that I wanted or something that I needed. And I've come to a personal place where I was able to make an informed choice based on what I found and leaning on voices that I trusted. And that resulted in, me having the vaccine at the end. But there are a lot of my friends and my family, and I totally respect their decision because they're not yet in a place where they believe that it's safe for them. And there are a number of reasons. So it comes to one of like the misinformation, but the lack of information that's being presented. To the voices who are saying that they need it. And because there's this, I guess, honestly, generations of mistrust between colored people and the medical system, it's a hindrance in this day and age.
Yeah. So I guess combining a bit of that, still talking about the vaccination stuff, do you think from our perspective, when that situation is evolving, is it beneficial for athletes like yourself if we're just getting straight on the front foot, putting out statements to support, or provide that information in a culturally sensitive way, to say, look, either this is why it needs to be done, or actually we, don't think that's a good idea, and we want to support our athletes, making that decision. Being on the front, I suppose, be proactive with it rather than reactive.
Absolutely. Like you'll never falter by being proactive, right? And I think also, like I'm thinking like bigger picture as well, like in those forums, having different people communicate it. So like it could be a doctor, could be like a physio, could be a church leader, like also remembering who your audience is. So like to give a bit of example, like I think someone like my bumbo who is, coming close to her mid 80s, she would have greater trust in a pastor saying, hey, this is what we think you should get, or this is what we don't think you should get, as opposed to a doctor. And the doctor has gone and studied for many years, and has a credible, like they're trusted. Like you're a doctor, you're trusted, but because of like that natural mistrust that honestly it can be passed down to like grandkids, and then it's just like this whole generational thing. Like use different voices to drive the message that drives people to a safer outcome.
No, that's incredibly helpful and useful information. So thank you. That's been really good. So that's probably all we've got time for now, Sarah. It's obviously been some pretty heavy stuff there towards the end, but I think you've provided us with a lot of really useful insights and how we can help make sport culturally safe. Sport is ubiquitous. We want everyone doing it. There's obviously health benefits, above and beyond just the professional side, that what we want to keep people involved. So particularly around those messaging and organisation stuff, I think, you've provided us with so much amazing information. So thank you so much for your time. I know it's been very short notice organising this, but we're certainly appreciative, and I'm sure our membership get a lot out of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Viran. I thoroughly enjoyed our chat this morning.